Welcome everybody, this is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors.
And this is Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors Group.
We'd like to welcome you to our K-12 Politics and Tech video series.
Our objective is to give you the absolute latest of what's going on in Sacramento that affects public school districts, obviously, and as well as all the technology stuff that's going on that's so vital to delivering for kids these days.
And remember, if you find these videos useful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share out over social media. You're our marketing team. We appreciate your support, and let's go ahead and get started. Hey, welcome everybody. Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors, back with another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. As always, Kevin Gordon, co-host of the show, is here. Kevin's President of Capital Advisors. Kevin, glad you're here.
Yep, good to be with you again, Tim.
Yeah, we want to thank everybody again for watching. We get a lot of nice emails and comments, so please, thank you so much for watching us every week. Continue to send in the nice comments and spread the word. We do appreciate that. So, Kevin, let's get started over in DC. There's new federal requirements on America's Rescue Plan announced this week. Can you fill us in on that, please?
Yeah, Secretary Cardona has made a little bit of news by issuing what are basically, if you will, sort of draft regulations, federal regulations that are out for comment. They are interim rules. But, I looked at them and, a lot of it applies to state education agencies. There is some that applies to local education agencies. And to me, most of it just reiterates what we have already expected, which is that there is going to be a process for public engagement in some level of accountability and putting together the plans and the activities that both the state education agencies and local school districts are going to be doing in implementing the American Rescue Plan resources, spending them. So there's planning requirements and that sort of thing for state education agencies and a whole lot of disclosure and engagement of key stakeholders. At the local level, they talk about a plan also, the plan that's required within 90 days of receipt of the funds, and the obligation of the state education agency, this would be CDE, to make sure they're putting out guidance to local school districts about what the deadlines will be and such on that. So CDE is, we're going to really be waiting to get that information from CDE as school districts. So it's interesting to look at, not a bad idea to take a peek at the U.S. Department of Education website. But again, most of the guidance you're going to get on how to deal with any of this stuff is going to come from CDE. And again, some of the cautions in there that they want to make sure that you're aware of, and I think every district is aware of it already, that with regard to the American Rescue Plan, that a full 20% of the money's got to be used for learning loss, and you've certainly made that point. And it kind of dovetails, and I know we were going to do this a little bit later, but we might as well do it now, is that, Tim, you're doing that great webinar that's going to be focused on kind of the digital aspects or the data aspects of complying with the requirements, both of state and federal relative to learning loss, and the notion of provision of evidence-based, services that address those needs. And what does that mean when it comes to data? And you'll have your data scientists on that program, right?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Blake Heller, who was on a couple of weeks ago, will be joining us, and he's going to talk about, reinventing your data infrastructure. So, what are the new points of data that you need in this hybrid world where you got people, teachers, and students at home? Sometimes they're on site, sometimes they're not. So, how do we reshift our data to meet some of the requirements that you're talking about, and also leverage some of the technology tools that everyone's invested so heavily in? How do we leverage those in a more effective way to meet some of those requirements and be able to, basically show the accountability, the evidence that you mentioned, Kevin.
Right.
So those will be top suggestions from experts in that regard, and it should be very helpful for the team. So that's April 29th at 11 a.m. And thanks for bringing that up, Kevin.
Right.
Appreciate it.
So one of the things that I wanted to kind of just build on, it's relative to this news that Secretary Cardona made this week on the idea of the interim rule that they are promulgating, is that there's a lot written about that 20%. But remember that the remainder of the money, 80% of that money, is allowed to be used on incredibly broad purposes. And it starts with anything that furthers the purpose of the major pieces of federal education programs that are out there. So Title I, IDEA, the Perkins Act. I mean, you go through the list. And then there are like 15 or so specific kinds of things that actually are repeated from the ESSER 2 guidance, that some of the categories are just broad enough to drive a truck through. Um, just very, very broad purposes. So got to pay attention to the stuff that's really specific, like that 20% set aside. And then you got to pay attention to these other things. The other thing I'll take advantage of just jumping into right now too is we got to remember that there are requirements on the state money that you're getting as well. And so one of the areas that's causing a good deal of consternation for folks is the stuff that relates to paraprofessionals. And it's really specific. 10% of the money for paraprofessionals, but know that it's not just compensation type issues that you can use it for professional development, but any unused money of that 10% that's not used for those specific purposes, this is on the state money, would have to be returned. So got to keep that in mind. So we got a lot of other topics to cover, but I wanted to hit those two at the top of the program.
Thanks for bringing those up, Kevin. And we've talked about the infrastructure bill the last couple of few weeks. There's a lot of debate going on in DC. Can you just give us the latest on the debate that you're hearing back in DC about the infrastructure bill?
Yeah, I mean, the negotiations can continue. The chief of staff to the president talked about, I think last week, that he didn't sense the kind of urgency that others might on some of the other initiatives the president had, like the American Rescue Plan and other things that they really wanted to accelerate. So they didn't give as much time for the idea of bipartisan conversations. Well, this week the president did invite over Republicans and some Democrat leadership to come together to talk about, what it might take to actually put together bipartisan support. I think that at the end of the day, they are going to end up having a pretty limited perspective about what they want the president to do with the money. And one of the things that was brought up this week in the meeting that they had was that some of the Republican leadership didn't understand why broadband would be included in infrastructure. They understood roads and bridges and buildings and those kinds of capital expenditures, but they just didn't feel like stretching to things like water quality or broadband belonged. And in fact, 4 members of the president's cabinet, 4, jumped into the conversation to underscore why broadband in particular belonged in the infrastructure conversation. And as you and I have talked about, Tim, there's been a lot of discussion about the fact that broadband access is the new vital utility of sort of this new age, and particularly after what we've been through. And I think, nobody in the school community would argue with that. So it makes its way forward. It's going to take more time to get this done. But again, they don't seem to feel like they've got to jam anything through like immediately.
Well, thanks for the update there, Kevin. And yeah, the need for broadband, the digital divide, the outcry for folks to be connected. It's basically the way a lot of people are making money today, and teachers are teaching and students are learning. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely glad to hear that that's still in the infrastructure bill, and hopefully that it remains there. But speaking about the digital divide, there's some interesting news from the East Coast. States taking digital divide in their own hands. New York passed a law that service providers had to provide $20 internet to low-income families, and that's pretty impressive. Such a large state would take such a heavy stand, on those service providers and really kind of make them offer something very inexpensive to those low-income families and robust internet at that. They were saying basically has to be 25 megabits up and down, which is far better than the old 5 or something that we used to see. I think it's encouraging to see states take that into their own hands. We've certainly seen a lot of momentum in California. But there's other states like New Jersey, for example. They announced that they closed the digital divide. They released 280,000 hotspots. So that's their approach, is give everyone a hotspot. And as our rural friends know, that doesn't always solve the problem. So they actually have a lot of people that aren't connected with hotspots because there's no cell coverage there. I bring that up because I think, Kevin, the last time we checked in, there's 30 something bills in California right now to help address this challenge. And we're not going to go through the whole list of them right now, but I would say there's a lot of small rural districts here. There may be some, advocacy you want to do, and I would encourage you to, contact the folks at Capital Advisors, contact your local representatives, tell them the challenges that you're facing, so that the bills that do make it through are bills that are actually going to help you reach your students. To me, it's if the folks that are passing the law hear from you, they're going to have a better understanding of what needs to be done to adequately reach people in today's world. So with that, I'll to say there's we were talking about this before the show, Kevin, but Roblox is a very popular app, and it's in the news this week. And basically Roblox has been a sweetheart in education for a long time. There's a lot of kids out there that use this every day, but it is an open platform and people can put anything they want in that Roblox platform. There is some adult content that is not appropriate for students, and half the daily average users are 13 or under. So the platform is now in a tricky position. They never really thought they were going to be moderating content, but now they're in a place where they're trying to identify inappropriate content and section off 13 and below so that they get age appropriate content. The reason why I bring this up is because it's very likely that your district is using Roblox or has used it. And I'm certainly not trying to villainize them. They are a wonderful platform and they're trying to do the right thing. But my goal here by bringing this up to you is just to say, make sure you're reviewing the apps that you're offering through your district to students. And it's something that you actually have to do on a semi-regular basis because companies get purchased, new innovations happen on the app, and something that used to be, perfectly safe and sensible, maybe you need to rethink or just be a little bit cautious with. So this is a, kind of a high level, make sure you're with your team reviewing the apps. And because an app has been, safe, doesn't mean it remains safe. So it's worth taking a look. Roblox is struggling with that right now, and that might be helpful information for you as you're bringing people back and maybe deciding how you're going to teach people next year. With that, Kevin, USDA made an announcement again this week, and can you fill us in on that latest announcement from them?
Yeah, so great news at the top of the week from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that really built on what they did at the outset of the pandemic, which is, I think this is probably the fourth or fifth extension that they've announced. But it started, of course, in the spring of last year when they announced that they were basically going to go to a universal meal program where you wouldn't have to be checking income levels. Obviously, it's the free and reduced meal program, meaning that kids would normally have to qualify, right? This would basically get rid of all the bureaucracy for determining who does or doesn't qualify. You just feed all kids, which is a great policy. It's something that follows something I've said for years. I think honestly, it would probably be less expensive for them to just make sure they're allowing us and funding us to feed all kids rather than the infrastructure necessary to track down those rotten kids that get a meal that they shouldn't have ever eaten. I mean, the notion that a child eats a meal at school and gets some good nutrition is something we all should be for. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture under the Biden administration has now extended that policy toward basically just funding meals for all kids into the next school year, in the entire school year. So it'll go all the way to June of 2022. So really good news there. And the other thing that it does is it creates a little bit of political traction for those like me and others that are advocating that the program be permanently changed. Again, it's a drop in the bucket in terms of federal spending. You think about all of federal spending and what we spend money on. It would be a very, very small amount of money to invest in that really, really important social good for all of our kids. There was a study that just came out of Tufts University that talked about the fact that during the pandemic, the most nutritional meal that a kid got during the entire pandemic was the meals that they got that were provided by their public schools. So kind of interesting data there. Anyway, but good news there, and it continues to roll forward, and we're thankful to hear that, and we'll keep working on this issue.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, to say USDA right in the beginning of the pandemic stepped up with this, and they've extended it at least 2 times, I believe, or at least once beyond this. So this would be the second, and it's really encouraging to hear. And I fully agree with you. Making sure students are able to eat is a big deal. So, not making it difficult to do so is wonderful, and we appreciate the USDA
There,
doing that.
there is another aspect of this, though, that we do have to watch, and that is that the local control funding formula we have here in California that has its dimension of identifying supplemental and concentration grant opportunities based on the number of kids you have in poverty or English language learners and foster youth is predicated on the free and reduced meal program. So, and it's largely predicated on how many parents and kids do you have who have signed up, who've done that paperwork so that they're in the program. Well, obviously, the more we push out this idea that you don't have to go certify families, the more lax that system gets for making sure that we're getting every kid counted that would count under that sort of metric. And so it's a real concern for districts that are really dependent on that supplemental concentration grant funding, which is, almost any district that gets it. And one of the things is it's not just simple enough to say, let's do a hold harmless so that you stay at the level you were. There are some districts, even districts that could be declining in enrollment, that might have actually growth in the number of kids that are in poverty. But the lack of data is not going to show that, and they're going to lose out on some entitlement. So we've alerted staff over at the Capitol about this to be thinking about potential fixes to this in the budget next year to make sure that we're using a proxy or that we're giving districts some latitude in how they're identifying their kids that would qualify them for, additional funding under LCFF. So it is an issue we have to deal with. Overall, great news, but it does have other policy implications that we have to keep in mind.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Kevin, and keep us posted if there's some updates on how that's shaken out in Sacramento. Yeah, and just wanted to call out. There's some big outages. I feel like every week there's outages, but we used to put it on as a bullet every week. But this week, Google had a major outage. Twitter had a major outage. As you're coming back to school, thinking about your security is really important. I know it keeps everybody up at night, but one quick thing, again, just kind of a best practice is, some of the outages that we've seen created are because there's an old device in someone's network. And that old device is a way in, a path into your network for folks to be able to shut it down. So as a leader, you don't have to be super technical to figure this one out, but you can ask, like, hey, what are the oldest devices that we have on our network? And is there any level of security at all on these things? And I'll just ask you to remember, when folks bring in whatever device they have and they get it on the Wi-Fi and it's in the classroom because they thought it was going to be an interesting device or teaching tool, that could be something that could cause an intrusion or some sort of cyber attack. Not to say that all these things are harmful, but there's potential there. So the biggest companies in the world are struggling with this right now. Certainly something that school districts should be thinking of, like, what's the oldest thing in my network? Is there any security there? Any leader can ask these questions. You may not be able to get an answer quickly, but it's definitely worth investigating to try to, improve your cybersecurity stance and your ability to keep those attacks off that we're seeing K-12 be really targeted by ransomware these days. So, with that, Kevin, I want to just jump in and the last topic here is push for more pension relief. There's a little interesting debate on that this week. Can you fill us in there?
Yeah, before I do that, I want to make a comment about your observation on the ransomware issue. And I think I touched on this a little bit last week, but I really want to underscore it this week, is we helped a district in northern LA County, the Newhall School District, with a problem they had because they'd had a ransomware attack last fall and it knocked them out, amazingly, for only one day because they really got on it and they set up basically a separate system to put all the kids on. They were completely distance learning. So of course you get a ransomware attack which shuts down everything. You can't run school. And the California Department of Education had initially said, sorry, we're not going to allow for you to get compensated for that day that you were out. It cost the district over $300,000, a little district, but that's a lot of money to them. And Tony Thurmond got personally involved with this and said, hold on a second. These are circumstances well beyond the ability of that little district to have anticipated. Let's get that taken care of. He personally got involved with this. But there are other districts like Rialto and other districts that had ransomware attacks that put them down. You might remember it, Tim, because I think you reported on it when it happened. It was very, very early on. It was one of the things we talk about over and over again. And honestly, while I've always thought the advice that you've given on this, Tim, is really smart advice for districts, they know that there's cost involved and a whole lot of effort you have to invest to protect yourself. And it's sort of like they got a lot of other things going on, so it ends up being kind of an afterthought. Well, the reason why I wanted to emphasize this is because I've talked to CDE a little bit about the Rialto situation and others, and they basically said, look, they're going to be a little harder line on this, particularly if you were out for a lot of days. And the reason why is because they said that there's been enough warnings, including, frankly, they referenced us, um, saying that you know that there are these problems and you've got to take affirmative steps toward protecting the district. And that when you end up getting penalized this big amount of money on ADA, that has very real cost for you in addition to all the headaches of trying to solve the problem. So, I know you specialize in helping districts with this, and I want to reinforce that because we very rarely kind of do the commercial for you, Tim. But it's really important for people to know they should reach out and we can help them develop strategies on how to address that issue so you don't end up having a cost later down the road that you're going to have to pay dearly for because you didn't get protected. So all those little bits of advice that you give about the oldest systems and stuff like that is really, really important. But districts really do need to take it seriously. So with that, I'll jump into the STRS thing. So on pension stuff, we are working really hard on the potential of the legislature and the governor actually doing more on pension relief in the coming year when they do this budget than they've done already. You might know that we had called for this last year, some 2 years of relief to school districts, and they did it, but they paid for it out of a budget that now is 2 years old. Um, there hasn't been any new investment or new expenditures by the state to give direct relief on the pension increases that we are shouldering as public school districts. And we think that we're being persuasive with both the administration and the legislature on actually doing more on this. So look for that to happen. One of the things that is notable is that CalSTRS itself for 21-22, that'll be the first year they actually get the legal authority to set their rates. As you know, in the past, PERS has always been able to set their own rates, but CalSTRS had to have the legislature actually set those rates. Now that they are able to do it themselves, I mean, we were a little nervous about what they might do when they look at sort of actuarials and what their costs look like into the future, that them giving having the authority to actually set those rates, you never know where they might be going. Well, it's interesting that there was some anticipation that in this first year that they could set the rates, they were actually thinking about dropping the rate from 19.2% down to 18.2, I think it is. I'm sorry, 19.1 down to 18.1. Now, when you add that extra buy down that the governor had built in, that would have taken it down to about 15.92%. So there's been some recent activity lately that's got them concerned enough to want to maybe just keep that rate at the 19.1 figure instead of dropping it down. And if they do, the adjusted relief that we'd get from what the governor has done in his budget takes you down to 16.92. We think there may be even more relief in the offing by the legislature doing what they've done in the past, which is actually appropriating money to buy some of this down for STRS. So keep tuned into that. That could be really helpful. One of the things that's negative about CalSTRS governance structure and when they may be acting on their piece is that their meeting's not till June 9th through the 11th. For us as school districts, it's going to be very hard for us to adjust if they're doing something that would absolutely affect our budgets. But of course, we've got that problem a little bit with regard to the Budget Act, but Budget Act doesn't get passed till June 15th. Or I would say what you want to do is budget on the numbers staying the same. But I think there's a really good chance that we're going to get some relief in that area, not just potentially by STRS itself, but by an act of the legislature and the governor. So we'll look at that.
Thanks, Kevin. We'll keep our fingers crossed for that because I know it's a tricky situation for folks, and I think it's wise advice is always from you about being a little conservative on it, but hoping for something good, a better outcome, if you will. So with that, I want to say thank you again, Kevin, and call out a couple of really important things. The budget workshops, the May Revised budget workshops, you can sign up for those We'll make sure that the links are below in the YouTube video, and then also emailed out to the Capital Advisors clients and Digital Advisors clients, of course. And then also want to call out the Brokerage of Expertise. Kevin, would you just kind of remind everybody what that is and when it's going to be?
Yes, so that's going to be coming up on May 3rd at 2 o'clock. It's Jack O'Connell kind of reprising his Brokers of Expertise approach to sharing best practices, which he did when he was state superintendent. So he's going to do a webinar on that, featuring probably as many as 4 or 5, maybe even more districts that have different approaches to how they're actually spending some of the funds that they're getting one time to address learning loss on a whole variety of different issues, student mental health issues, extended day, extended year, all those kinds of things. So some good content there.
Wonderful. Looking forward to that. And again, everyone look for the links to these. Glad you're finding these videos useful. Please spread the word. We're on our marks to get to 1,000 subscribers. So, if you could do that for us, we would appreciate it. And we want to say thanks everybody for tuning in this week. Thank you, Kevin, and we'll see you all next week.
Great. We'll see y'all. Bye-bye. So thanks again for joining us for another week of this broadcast.
And I just want to take a moment to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and share this out over social media. Again, you're our marketing team. I'll also finish by saying, if you have some questions, please send them our way. We'd be happy to address them on a future broadcast. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.